Pastures Christian Ministries. Thank you for joining us again for our Bible study. This is our second installment here. We hope to see many more, and we pray that you continue to share these videos. Take your time, listen to them while you're washing the dishes, while you're cleaning the home, or just in your own quiet meditation time. Take the scriptures, ingest them, and allow God to change you from the inside out. We're going to start a short series this time. It's a two-parter. We're going to be discussing manna from Exodus and talking about how it is truly the bread of life and the different themes that are communicated to us from God through the story of the manna. Now, it is basically all of Exodus chapter 16, but we're going to take certain excerpts so we can focus on a couple of the main themes, actually probably about 2 or 3 of them. Now, we'll start at chapter 16 from verses 16 to 20, dealing with the way in which manna was collected. And it starts in the CSB version by saying, "This is what the Lord has commanded," in reference to the manna. "Gather as much of it as each person needs to eat. You may take 2 quarts per individual according to the number of people that is in your tent or your home." So the Israelites did this. Some gathered a lot, some a little. When they measured it by quarts, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus, and the person who gathered a little had no shortage. Each got as much as they needed to eat. Moses said to them, "No one is to let any of it remain until morning." But they didn't listen to Moses. Some people let part of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. Therefore, Moses was angry with them. The lesson we're going to get from this slight excerpt here is we're going to start looking at God's desire to teach us to trust Him, and to trust Him why, so we can get to understand that God in Himself is generous, and His very nature is to be generous. So let's start with looking at the prescription that was given to the children of Israel as far as how to collect this manna. These 2 quarts, and a lot of you who are reading in more traditional versions will see that it's measured as 1 omer, and they're equivalent. It was enough manna for them for the entire day. Those who did not trust in God, or did trust in what Moses was telling them about it, they would gather more than what God had prescribed them to. And when they had gotten their fill, what they found is that the next day, the excess had spoiled. God was looking here to try to discourage His children from greed, and we'll see how that flows out later. We will see there is that their plans to make sure that they had more than enough was according to their own wisdom. Let me get as much as I can, pack it up so I know that there'll be enough for the day. And what they find is that this plan, with no pun intended, was spoiled. Now, those that decided then to trust in God would find that it was enough and they could continue to follow His instructions. So God's whole plan here was from the beginning to start building trust with the children of Israel, so they can understand that His ways or His instructions are sufficient. And where we see the desire, it is that we would be assured that God will do exactly what He said He would do. But without this, we'll decide to go our own way. And we tend to do this when we think that somehow or another God is holding back on us. He's keeping something from us, or there's something that's not being exposed. And this is within human nature. And we find this first exposed. We can see this in the Garden of Eden. And when it comes to Adam and Eve at the tree and deciding to take from the fruit, after having conversation with the serpent, Eve began to believe that maybe God is trying to keep something from me. Maybe there is something else to all this wonderful stuff I have. There's more that I can have. And she decided to seek and to gain this on her own. So even from the beginning, it was within our nature, when we're given choice, to wonder, is the one giving the instructions actually really looking out for my best interest? Could they be holding out on me? Is God really not truly sharing in His generosity? The lesson to be taught again for the children of Israel is that God is generous. This lesson was especially important when it came to how He prescribed for them to gather the manna. It didn't matter what reasons they disobeyed the instructions. Maybe some of them came because they were worried that maybe their brother and sister wouldn't have enough manna if they gathered as much as they did. So they decided to leave some to the side so someone else could get some. Or maybe they were worried, like we would think logically, that at the end of the day they wouldn't have enough manna. And maybe truly they just wanted to be generous. They didn't need a full omer or 2 quarts. I can take a half and let everybody else have some. It didn't matter which way they did it. God was trying to teach a lesson on all ends that they can be trusted. But we find the people, they were free to choose even after the instructions were given. Now, we see this idea of God being generous worked out elsewhere in Scripture. But what we also find is that in Leviticus, it goes on to talk about a law of gleaning. This law of gleaning can be found in Leviticus 19, 9 through 10. This will tie in a little later, but it tells us that when you reap harvest in your land, you are not to reap to the very edge of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not strip your wine vineyards bare of all the fallen grapes. Leave some for the poor and the resident alien, for I am the Lord your God. Now make sure we're clear in our terms here. He said, leave it for the poor and the resident alien. Your resident aliens were your basically non-Israelites and non-Jews that may have come to the land. They may have been fleeing persecution. They may have had to leave their homes for whatever reason or passing through. But oftentimes when you stay in a certain area during this season, someone would come to your area passing through whatever they would need resources. The idea here is that there were laws in place to make sure that there was plenty and there was generosity within the children of Israel, which was a lot unlike the surrounding nations. So the laws put in place that when you were fortunate enough to have a field to harvest, or you're fortunate enough to have vineyards to pull grapes from, that you didn't just keep it all for yourself, that there was some left in excess so that the poor would have something. And the resident alien who may not be able to find work or may have just showed up, they can also be able to find nourishment. Now, with this harvest, the gleaning to understand is a falling by the wayside. So you can imagine going through a field of wheat and harvesting. Some falls on the ground. You have some at the edge of your property that falls out. If extra falls on the ground, you continue to work the wheat in front of you. If some is falling by the wayside, that's where others get the glean from. Same with your grapes. As they're pulled from the vines, if some fall on the ground, leave those for, again, the poor and the resident aliens. What this did, again, it discouraged greed. And it promoted generosity, because within our natural hearts, we don't tend to want to share, especially when we're not sure, again, like the manna. Is there going to be enough? Is what's being prescribed going to last all day? Our tendency is to hoard everything we can get and make sure that we have enough, then maybe we'll share. God's prompting the generosity, and the generosity is bred from the trust in Him, not in our own process. Now, so in the desert, we find that what God is doing is He's showing the children of Israel His heart. He's showing His heart out enough through the prescription or through the law or through His instructions. Now let's go in this and see exactly how He does this. God's directive to gather the manna and to store the manna was like the law, giving you specific instructions on what to do and when to do it. Now, this particular one with the manna, it had no restrictions on the children of Israel. It was a restriction in the sense of it told them what not to do, but why we need to look at it is there were instructions on how to partake in God's generosity. You can't access God's generosity and His grace however you want to. There's a way to come in and to be able to attain it. Just like anything else that you want to attain, there's a way to get in. There's a process you have to go through. And God was teaching them that their natural inclination to how to do things was not appropriate and would not yield His generosity. So in order to follow His generosity, they had to follow His prescription to be able to attain it. Now, the disobedient, interestingly enough with this, found that when they gathered more, they didn't have it at the end of the day, and they were still stuck with the 1 omer or the 2 quarts. And if they had access, notice in this passage, they were never punished for gathering the excess. They'd wake up in the morning, and the excess would be spoiled, and they couldn't partake of it. And that's when you start to realize it really was enough. So maybe they tried the next day, and it spoiled the next day. There was never a penalty. No one was drug out of their tent. No one was beat. No one was exiled. It was a process of learning that God's way really was enough, and I don't have to yield on my own understanding or do it my own way in order to get it. And those who doubt can now begin to say, maybe there is something to it. And even those who maybe were saying, okay, I'll just keep only a little bit for myself and let somebody else have it, realize that even though I might be able to do it 1 quart, God is generous enough to offer me 2 for every person in my home. And it is enough. So I can still trust in him to be able to follow what he says. So God was not trying to be punitive in how he trained the children of Israel. This was a position to bring them into a closer relationship with him. Now, this is a principle that goes all throughout the Bible, this trust in God. We can begin to see it also with our gleaning. We see it taken moving forward when you look into the book of Ruth. And you see that Naomi told Ruth to go to her Boaz's field and to glean from there. And you can get into the passages, get into a lot of the details on how gleaning took place and how the law was. And interestingly enough, you can also see, when you go read that book, that you can see how people, even though the law was there was still that inclination for people, to be selfish, to be territorial. And even as she came to glean, Boaz instructed her of where to glean from so she could get the best harvest, and also advised her that he's going to make sure that no one messes with her. Being that even on the grounds level, even when people are trying to apply laws, everyone doesn't always do the right thing, but we can still, even in that story, see how she could trust God through that process, and how the gleaning made sure that she had what she and Naomi needed in their time being destitute. Again, you see clearly worked out there how the law was being put in place to bring about generosity from the people, even when they may not have had the natural inclination to do it. Now, we see the same principle also comes forward if we go to the New Testament. If you look in Matthew 19, there's a parable there about a rich man. We got about 30 rich men in the Bible, but this is the particular one that came to Jesus and asked him, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus quickly answered him and told him, take all that you have, sell it to the poor, and then come and follow me. What we find here is that Jesus was looking to walk out this same process with this rich man in a sense of righteousness in what it was and faith in what that was. You have a rich man who already knew the law and had probably likely already understood and felt that he was walking upright as it was. And then he had his wealth, so he was not in need of anything. He in every sense had an abundance. And so what Jesus tells him is to get rid of all these things and just simply follow him. This man has an abundance, has a sense of righteousness. And then here we have Jesus telling him, very similar to how it comes with the manna, that you need to take the abundance and share it with those that are less fortunate. And naturally to this man, he's looking at all the things that he has and all the wealth. He's asked to give this up to those who don't have enough, to be extremely generous. But this is everything he has. This is everything that probably even identifies who he is because of the wealth that he has. And then Jesus takes a step further, just as the manna is, and says, follow me. As to say, you don't have to have all the access. All you really need is me. All you really need is the bread from heaven. And here we have a man that's been asked to follow a certain set of instructions to go after Jesus instead of going after his possessions. So he's been shown in this situation that Jesus is enough to sustain him, but is he going to trust the prescription? Is he going to enter into the relationship? There was no punishment here. It was a question. It was an offer. As every day with God, it's an invitation to be able to take part in his generosity. How? By obeying what he's giving you. You want the generosity? Follow these instructions. In the case of the rich man, take everything that you have, give it to the poor. Trust me. And then trust that I alone am enough to sustain you. And again, you don't need to have the bread from heaven. You need the bread of heaven, which is found in Jesus Christ himself. The Bible goes on to tell us that this rich man, he couldn't do it because he was very rich. Again, it's the snare of greed. It's the snare of wealth. And when we go all the way back to the beginning of our story for our first parable with the children of Israel in the desert with the manna, it is this very seed that God was already starting to prepare the children of Israel to have to face. He knew what would come later on. He knew wealth would come. He knew prosperity would come. He knew the temptation there would be to get more, have more, gather more, build bigger barns. So from the beginning, in a way to engage his people, he began to train them and teach them that his way is the better way. And we don't have to go about our way, but if we take it from the prescription that he's given us, then we can go forth and be able to share with others. And he will be the one to assure that we have the abundance, because he alone is truly generous. In this, God is trying to show us that his commandments are not strict rules. Even though one commandment or one truth or one principle in itself may very well be a strict rule, it's not for you to bump up against and to figure out, I can't do this, or I can't do that, or I have a restriction here. These are guideposts. What they're doing is letting you know you can't go too far to the left, too far to the right. He wants to lead you down an aisle. He wants to lead you on a road to a direction by a certain prescription instead of instructions, where you and I and all of us can partake in his generosity. The instructions at first may not appear to be generous, because a lot of times they go against, again, our natural inclination to do what it is that we want to do. But however, when we follow those instructions, much as we see with the manna, that God then reveals that he is generous and plentiful and able to supply all that we need. Now, this is the first section for this discussion here on the manna. We're going to pick up again later, and we'll talk about the second piece, where we'll go further into the full generosity of God and what his plan is for you. So I hope this was a blessing to you. I pray again that you would take the word, meditate on it, allow it to invade your heart. Then you'll find that it'll change your mind, and it can also change your life. Thanks for joining us.